Gangsters used to be icons of style. Suits, fedoras, leather shoes. Every detail was sharp, refined, and deliberate. Even the lowest level mobster wouldn't be caught dead in jeans or sweatpants. But today, gangsters dress like they just rolled out of bed. How did this absolutely criminal decline in dress codes come about? And what does it say about law-abiding individuals like you and I? Today we are breaking down the rise and fall of the well-dressed gangster, going from the streets of 1920s Chicago to the modern-day criminal underworld. Hello, my name is James, and I am on a mission to create a generation of gentlemen. First, let's go back to what I would describe as the golden age of the gangster. I'm talking about the heyday of figures like Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, and Meyer Lansky. These men all dressed like kings. Not just for style. You see, back in the day, gangsters weren't just criminals. They were celebrities, figures of wealth, power, and status. The most notorious gangsters dressed in a flashy, opulent way, not just because they loved clothing and they enjoyed it, but also because they understood that their clothing was a weapon of influence. And to a gangster, being well-dressed sent three messages. First, it sent a message of power and wealth. Having a custom suit showed a level of success, back in an era when most men could barely afford one or two good suits. Second, it allowed them to blend in with the elite. You see, the old school mobsters didn't just want to acquire money. They actually wanted to be accepted into higher society. And third, the way they dressed induced respect and fear in their enemies. And when you dress like a serious businessman, people will treat you like one, even if you're actually running an illegal empire. You see, back in the early 20th century, the suit was a status symbol, and it was normal for everybody to dress in a way that we would describe today as very formal. Even working class men wore shirts and even suits every single day. But the gangsters took this to another level, and they did what we would describe today as peacocking. They didn't want to just blend in, they actually wanted to capture attention with the way they looked. And Al Capone's wardrobe alone was worth around $500,000 in today's money. He had custom Italian suits, diamond pinky rings, silk ties and pocket squares. And this wasn't just about vanity, it was about creating an image of legitimacy. And you have to remember that during the Prohibition era, the gangsters were the ones keeping America drinking, and many people were opposed to the 18th Amendment. So not every gangster was so despised or disliked in the public eye the same way they would be today. And the gangsters were also running casinos, they were mingling with politicians, so they needed to look the part. And even in fiction, we saw mobsters dress to impress. Hollywood completely cemented this image with movies like The Godfather, later on Goodfellas. That's why we have this iconic image of the gangster as a well-dressed figure. However, this image began to fall apart from the 1970s onward, leaving us where we are today. After the 1960s, society and fashion became increasingly casual, and the suit was no longer the daily uniform for the law-abiding citizen nor the criminal. After the counterculture of the 1960s rejected formal wear, we even began to see business elites dressing down, slowly, over the years. And by the 1990s, athleisure, sneakers, and t-shirts had pretty much taken over. And it's only natural that when the rest of society stops wearing suits, that criminals will also. But what's more interesting is to look at how the mafia lost its grip, and how that completely destroyed the image of the well-dressed gangster. So the downfall of the mafia in the 80s and 90s in New York and the US completely changed everything. Before then, organized crime was run pretty much like a legitimate business. But after that, it became more about street gangs and cartels, organizations that were much less organized and much less businesslike on the surface. John Gotti was pretty much the last of the so-called dapper dons. When he got taken down in 1992, the era of the well-dressed gangster was truly over. During the same time in the 80s and 90s, a new gangster style developed that was distinctly different from how ordinary people on the street were dressing. And this is all due to hip-hop culture. Hip-hop culture replaced the old-school mafioso way of dressing in the criminal underworld. And it also changed the way that people would look at those who had become successful and opulent through criminal means. Many of the rappers that became big at this time were either previously gangsters themselves or were associated with gangs. And in their music videos and in their publicity shots, they wore tracksuits, they wore oversized jackets, they wore sneakers and huge gold chains. And just like the mafia suits of decades gone by, this was now the way that people showed their power and success as gangsters. The way that organized crime operates has also changed significantly, and this has resulted in a change of dress. The Italian mafia was all about secrecy. It was about discretion and respect. Whereas today's criminal gangs prefer to show off, or flex as it's called. When you look at the biggest cartel bosses of the last couple of decades, men like El Chapo or Pablo Escobar, they didn't wear suits. They wore casual, practical clothing. Because at no point was Pablo Escobar trying to maintain this illusion of legitimacy. He wasn't in New York rubbing shoulders with politicians, trying to be friends with the judges and the chief of police. The modern-day cartels very firmly place themselves in the criminal underworld and spend their time evading and running away from the law. The truth is, gangsters still use clothing as a status symbol, but instead of suits, they wear luxury streetwear, brands like Gucci, Balenciaga, Off-White. They wear designer sneakers, Jordans and Yeezys. And of course, the jewelry, those massive gold chains and watches. In a sense, what they're doing is actually the same idea as what the older gangsters used to do. Look like you have a lot of money, and therefore command respect. But they would probably argue that the difference is, because society has changed, a suit is no longer the best way to demonstrate power. So the old school gentleman gangster look isn't coming back anytime soon. But there is still something very powerful about the classic mobster aesthetic. And I know that some of you watching will have been inspired by characters like Michael Corleone or perhaps Tommy Shelby from Peaky Blinders. Because whether you are a criminal or an ordinary law-abiding man, there's something about a classic suit that will always be appealing. So maybe the real question isn't why did gangsters stop dressing up, but why did the rest of us? Why did society let its standards slip? Let me know down in the comments if you think we will ever see the return of the well-dressed gangster, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.